As the temps start rising, I feel the familiar urge to refresh my closet, but I don't want to waste money on pieces I'll only wear once or for just one season. Thankfully, Quince changes that. Their clothes are timeless, lightweight, and far more elevated than anything else at this price. It finally feels like my wardrobe matches my standards. The best part is that Quince only works with factories that use safe, ethical, and responsible manufacturing practices and premium fabrics and finishes, so you get to look good while feeling good. I'm pretty excited that I have upgraded my athleisure wardrobe for this summer. I bought a sweatshirt and a pair of wide-leg flow pants that are two of the softest items I own, and I plan to live in them. So join me in giving your summer closet an upgrade with Quince. Go to quince.com/POTC for free shipping on your order and 365-day returns. That's QUINCE.com/POTC to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/POTC.
We need to become more discriminating, more discerning, to be able to be conscious in a way, simply just to think every time we encounter something. Is this going to improve my life or not? Is it worth the time which we pay? So in fact, most information for any individual has negative value because the value of our attention, the value of our time in paying attention to it is simply not as much as what we get from it. So we get depleted by giving attention to things which are not actually serving us. So we need to become more discerning over time. And the way in which we do that is partly building a portfolio of the right information sources.
That was Ross Dawson on Psychologists Off the Clock. We are four experts in psychology here to bring you cutting-edge and science-based ideas from psychology to help you flourish in your relationships, work, and health.
I'm Dr. Debbie Sorensen, a clinical psychologist practicing in Mile High, Denver, Colorado, and author of Act for Burnout, Act Daily Journal, and the Act Daily Card Deck.
From America's Heartland, I'm Dr. Emily Edlin, a clinical psychologist based in Chicago, Illinois, and author of Autonomy Supportive Parenting.
Calling in from Vienna, Austria, I'm Michael Herold, ACT coach, confidence trainer, and author of an upcoming book on being a better conversationalist and making friends.
And from coastal New England, I'm Dr. Jill Stoddard, author of Be Mighty, The Big Book of ACT Metaphors, and Imposter No More.
We hope you take what you learn here to build a rich and meaningful life.
Thank you for listening to Psychologists Off the Clock.
I'm here with Michael to introduce today's episode with Ross Dawson, who wrote a book called Thriving on Overload, The 5 Powers for Success in a World of Exponential Information. And Michael, I'm wondering what your thoughts about this world of exponential information are.
Well, the first thing I had to think about as I was going through the interview was my first exposure to the internet when I was a teenager, and the electronic stores would have a computer there that was connected to the internet, and you could go there and use it, just like they have video game consoles there now to try out. And there was a computer connected to the internet. And so while I was waiting for my bus to go back home after school, I would be in line to use that computer, and there would be other teenagers being on the internet. And that was my turn. And I didn't know what to like. I didn't know what to read. It was like, okay, I'm going to go here. I'm going to read some jokes. And then it felt like 5 minutes later, I had finished the internet. I was like, okay, I'm bored now. I'm going to go home. It's time to grab
read everything there is to read.
That's it.
And so what I'm guessing you're saying is that maybe that experience has changed slightly since you were a teenager.
Has changed a lot, yes, and not necessarily to the better, even though I will say that there is a lot of good on the internet, of course. But the way that my internet use starts during the day is that there are these moments of brief boredom. I'm waiting for my coffee and the phone comes out and I'm thumping through the internet, the social media, and particular social media. And my social media is very well curated, as I think you said. Yours is too in the interview. So I really only get stuff that actually interests me. And so I'm thumping through that stuff more or less mindlessly. And then I come across this post or that post that's really interesting, that's related to my work, that's related to something I'm interested in. I click on it and I realize, this website has more than 50 words and there are barely any pictures in it. And then I get overwhelmed. I was like, okay, I'm going to bookmark this. I'm going to read it later. And I keep thumbing. And so my bookmarks folder with articles that I need to read at one point gets so large that I just need to go in and Maria Kondo the entire thing and take everything out again. And then the entire process starts over, which I find so weird that the superficial stuff soaks me in and takes my time and energy and attention. But the really good stuff, that kind of falls through the cracks. And I know that you discussed that with him as well in the interview.
Yeah. And I think that, what was really useful about this interview is he gives you a process for making decisions about that information, what to read, whether to read it. And so do you feel like after this interview, you have kind of like a better plan for how to do this more efficiently or more effectively instead of just saving it all and then ditching it all and then saving it all and then ditching it all?
Yeah, I definitely feel like he gives a really good framework on how to approach that thing. That is a really good balance between time and what you get out of it. I have to say that for me, this is still in the testing phase because my willpower is going to get in the way. Having the system that will definitely work and is very well laid out, and Michael in the morning taking the phone out and scrolling. So I'll report back in on how that has developed for me. And as a side note, one thing you talk about in that system as well is having playing to the algorithm. So you only see things that are relevant to you. And I had to chuckle just this morning because I'm now, since we had an episode on menopause on Psychologist Off the Clock, I'm now getting posts about menopause, which just speaks to the fact that Instagram doesn't know me that well.
Well, I actually love that you're getting those posts because even though menopause isn't going to happen to you, it's going to happen to a lot of the people around you. So it's not a bad thing for you to be learning.
I can share those posts. Yeah, I will copiously share those posts.
That's hysterical. Well, what you say about this being kind of a work in progress, that is very relatable. I'm the one that did the interview and it's been a little time. You just listened to it recently. I did it a little while ago. And it was just this morning that I was realizing I'm not a great sleeper and I wake up very early most mornings and, it's dark and I don't feel like getting up and I'm still tired even though I'm awake. And so I do the mindless scrolling. And, I realized that we really need to have a social media presence. When you're a book author, many different kinds of professions kind of require you to have a platform and a presence. And it was really just this morning that I thought, I'm wide awake. I could be using this time much more effectively, that instead of just mindlessly scrolling for 2 hours when I'm then ready to get up and start my day, I could actually use this time in an efficient way so that I don't have to spend time doing this later when I'd rather be doing other things. And then maybe it wouldn't feel like such a burden. So it occurred to me as we were preparing for this intro, I thought, what? I need to go back to this interview with Ross and think about what can his 5 powers teach me about shifting my relationship to this particular aspect of social media so that I can do this in a more helpful way.
So at the end of the episode, you actually share a quote from the book that was so eye-opening to me that I immediately thought this was something that I should have learned from Kermit the Frog 30 years ago. It was a single quote that was more useful to me than reading 10 books on the matter. So I hope everyone here is listening to the end and getting to that golden nugget.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's why of the whole entire book, that quote felt like it needed to be picked out and shared. And I think it's even in the intro to the book, but I think I waited till the end because it felt like that really important, monumental way to wrap up all of what he was talking about. That's a real mindset shift.
Yeah, it is.
Well, we hope you enjoy this episode with Ross Dawson. Hey, everybody, it's Jill here, and I'm so excited to introduce my guest today, Ross Dawson. Ross Dawson is globally recognized as a leading futurist, entrepreneur, keynote speaker, and strategy advisor. Ross is founding chairman of the Advanced Human Technologies Group of Companies and Bondi Innovation Alliance. He travels the world helping business and government leaders think about the future, having delivered keynotes and strategy workshops in over 30 countries across 6 continents. He is the best-selling author of 5 books, including Thriving on Overload, The 5 Powers for Success in a World of Exponential Information, which is what we will be talking about with him today. Ross frequently appears in the media, including on CNN, Bloomberg TV, Sky News, ABC TV, USA Today, the Today and Sunrise shows, and many other programs. Ross, thank you so much for joining us on Psychologists Off the Clock from around the world in Australia, where it's very late for you. So I really appreciate you being here with me today.
Delighted to be talking with you.
Well, so the way that I found out about your book is I had Kelly Leonard on the podcast, and you've been on his podcast, Getting to Yes and I loved my conversation with Kelly, and I asked him, who are some of your, he and I have shared a lot of guests, so I know we have similar interests. I said, who is one of your favorite guests, favorite interviews? And he brought up your name. So that's the connection. If you were wondering how a psychology podcast found you, it was through Kelly.
Well, it's a wonderful connection, actually, because I was delighted that I spoke with him on the podcast because I actually mentioned Second City, which is the improvisational theater troupe, which is in my book, as this idea of improvisation, this ability to connect directly to us and how we communicate is really fundamental. It's a fundamental capability and skill in this world. So I was absolutely delighted to be invited on and have that conversation around this idea of how do we improvise our way through life.
Right. Well, it was funny when I was listening to your interview with him, I thought, oh, there's the proof that Kelly actually read the book. Because, sometimes when someone interviews you, they haven't actually read the book that you've written. And he says something like, right there on page 167, you mention, get his book, Yes and Second City. And I just thought that was so great. That must have made you feel good to go, oh, he actually read the book. He was paying attention to the details.
That's a good thing.
Right. So you start this book citing some absolutely staggering numbers regarding the exponentially increasing amount of information that's become available to us humans over recent years. And you talk about our natural tendency to want to seek novelty. The information gives us those like dopamine surges our brains are so fond of. But of course, an overload of information can be damaging. And so your book is basically a roadmap for navigating this, for thriving on overload, as the title so aptly suggests, using 5 different powers. And so I want to talk about the powers in a second. But can you talk a little bit, just kind of big picture, why this is important? Like, what is at risk if we don't harness these powers in this age of information overload?
Well, we have created this problem for ourselves. And humans are inventors, and we created all sorts of things. We've created all sorts of information. We've gained knowledge on all fronts. And to the point where our brains are, in fact, not very well suited to the environment we've created.
Yeah.
So, as you suggest, we are always seeking novelty. Our brains were evolved in an environment where if things were the same, they weren't as interesting. If there was a rustling in the brush, could be food or it could be something hunting us, and we needed to pay attention to that. So that served us well in that environment. But now the way in which our brain is essentially looks for this information does not function well at all when we have a wealth of information on all fronts wherever we go. And we can see this when people are scanning through their phones, when they're just even waiting for to cross a pedestrian traffic. They're just not able to not have information. They've got it for the first time ever. So we need to train our brains, train ourselves to gain the habits, the approaches, the behaviors which serve us well. And I think we can shift from this world of being overloaded and overwhelmed. And essentially, if we let ourselves, we will drown in the amount of information that we have. But we can change our mindset and our approach to saying, instead of being overwhelmed, that in fact we can live in a world of abundance. Because if we know what we want to achieve, then we say, well, we've got all the information we could ever want. And we have these resources, this incredible resources of the knowledge and information which is available. And if we can find what it is that is useful and pertinent to what it is we want to achieve, we have that. So we can shift, and it becomes a superpower. And indeed, those people that are successful today are those that have worked out for themselves how to thrive in this world where there is unlimited information, but ones which, if we let it, will absolutely drown us.
Crush us, right? Yeah, it's really interesting to think about. It's about the process, not the collection of facts, but about the process of how we go about it. And it just made me think of you actually on Kelly's podcast, you point out that information is really anything that comes at us. So it's not just the data on our screens, which honestly, I think is how I was thinking about it when I was reading your book. But I think you give the example of, a baby crying is information. And so when you think about it that way, we're just bombarded every single second, even when we're not on our phones. And our brains were designed, in some ways, autopilot is a good thing, because if we paid attention to every sensory input every second of every day, we would be overloaded. And being on autopilot allows us to sort of not have to do that. But autopilot can be problematic when we're on autopilot and we're on our phones, social media, whatever else. And what you're suggesting is, and correct me if this is wrong, is that we need to get more mindful. We need to get more thoughtful about what we're consuming and, more importantly, how we're consuming it.
Absolutely. And one of the significant roles of the prefrontal cortex is filtering information, because we have a constant barrage of information. And if we always paid attention to everything, our brains would be overwhelmed. And some types of mental disorders are, in fact, essentially a breakdown of our filtering functions. And some people who experience this overwhelm are, essentially there's a dysfunction where they are not able to filter effectively. We do need to filter the world. But there is a very big danger in that, where we essentially filter out almost everything. And we're not paying attention to the world, where there is no mindfulness to that. We essentially go into our shells. And I think there's a lot of people that live very hollow lives, essentially, because they filter out everything. They watch their streaming shows, but they are not actually paying attention and seeing the richness of the world, which for its beauty and for its functionality and its utility of learning about the world and how it is we can respond to that.
And that is the purpose of information, right? So that we can learn, so that we can make choices that make our life better. So let's talk about how to do that. So why don't we start with the power of purpose, which my co-host and I, we say this on the podcast all the time, but my co-hosts and I, we all practice a psychotherapy called acceptance and commitment therapy. And a hugely important part of that is paying attention to your values, who and how you want to be in the world. And your first power in thriving on overload is the power of purpose. And so that reminded me a lot of values. And you say, quote, understanding your purpose for engaging with information is a prerequisite for thriving amid excess. So tell us a little bit about what you mean by this, and maybe even what you don't mean by this, because that word purpose has come to mean, maybe lots of different things.
Yeah. And I think that there is almost purpose porn, in the sense that, people just purpose, and the mantra around us has lost value in it.
Right. It's become a meme
in many ways. Yes.
Right. Yeah.
But it is what it is that guides our lives on a big scale and on a smaller scale. And when we have unlimited information, we need to have something that guides us as to what it is that serves us. What information serves us and what information doesn't serve us. And the only way to know is to understand what it is we want to achieve. And we can think about, this is the purpose of my life. This is what the positive impact I want to have. It could be on a smaller level. These are the next step I want to have in my career. It could be in terms of, this is what I want for my health or those of my loved ones, or other things which are important. So once you understand the things that are important, you can quite simply sort out, this is useful to me, this actually adds value to my life. And it starts to become pretty evident that there's plenty of things that come at us in the information environment which do not serve us.
Yeah.
They're not helping us be who we want to be, have the impact we want to have, to achieve our objectives, to help our family or community or whatever it may be. And so this has to be the starting point, simply to know what information is, serves us, gives value to us, assists us in achieving our purpose, and that doesn't.
So it's really about your why, like your why for engaging with information. And there can be lots of different whys, and those whys can change over time. But it's not your big global purpose, like, this was what I was put on this planet to do. It could just be, a more specific why. Like if you are looking for a new job, then that might be part of a purpose for seeking information.
Or a great restaurant to go to.
Right. Yeah. So you talk about 6 different domains that can reflect different whys for engaging with information. So these are things like identity, expertise, ventures, society, well-being, and passions. And so the book goes into lots of helpful detail about what all of those different domains are. And you even say there might be other domains that you haven't specifically identified. And there are a lot of really great exercises. So if, folks can read the book if they want more detail on that. But do you want to give us at least a tip or two for how we might get more clear on which sphere best reflects our purpose, or how we might just get more clear on what our purpose might be when we're making these choices around engaging with information?
Certainly. Well, I think one of the most important ones and the most relevant for many people is our area of expertise. And we do need to have depth. We do need to know more. In order to be a generalist, we first need to be a specialist in something, or at least one thing. So in a complex world, we need to have a depth of expertise, of understanding in one or more domains. And that's a really primary choice to make, which guides our careers. Or even if we're on a career, saying, well, what am I going to specialize in? What am I going to know more than my peers on? What is it that fascinates me the most? So in the short term, and just in currently in this month or the next months, as well as in the next years or through your life, saying, what is it that I want to be an expert in?
Yeah.
To where I will be distinctive. We all have to be distinctive in a very busy world with 8 billion people all following their own course. So that's one of the first things is simply putting some thought. All right. And just writing that down as a sentence or two. All right. I will focus on this particular area of expertise. And that immediately gives clarity.
I just had a thought that was sort of a funny example, is that in general, I don't need to know about what Kim Kardashian is doing with her life. I don't need to know who she's dating. I don't need to know how many children she has. But recently she was on the cover of, I think it was either Time or Forbes. I forget which one, but a big magazine, because her company, I can't even remember what it's called because it doesn't really matter, but her company was very successful and she was on the cover of this magazine. And a part of the article was that she was talking about how despite her success, she really suffered from a lot of imposter thoughts and feelings. And I have a book on imposter, quote unquote, syndrome coming out in a few weeks.
Right.
And so that was an example where I need to essentially filter out all things Kim Kardashian, except when she's on the cover of a business magazine talking about her experience of the imposter phenomenon, which is something that I am, trying to become more expert in as I get ready to launch this book.
And have some great case studies to talk about.
Right? Yeah, exactly. And maybe that's more reflective of the power of filtering, which maybe we could just talk about that now. So some of these maybe overlap because the purpose is related to expertise, but then there's this filtering of what I do and don't need to know when it comes to information about Kim Kardashian. So since that's sort of a natural segue, do you want to talk a little bit about filtering?
Indeed. Well, I think there's a few layers to it. I mean, one of them is being able to, distinguish between the information that serves us, that gives value to us, and that which doesn't. And this is something where we sensitize it. We need to become more discriminating, more discerning, to be able to be conscious in a way, simply just to think every time we encounter something. Is this going to improve my life or not? Is it worth the time which we pay? So in fact, most information for any individual has negative value because the value of our attention, the value of our time in paying attention to it is simply not as much as what we get from it. So we get depleted by giving attention to things which are not actually serving us. So we need to become more discerning over time. And the way in which we do that is partly building a portfolio of the right information sources. And so just as we manage an investment portfolio, we need to be diverse and have different types of assets and so on, we also need to have a portfolio of information sources that are diverse. It's not just one source or one particular approach or one topic, just only going to mainstream media or only going through social media, whatever it may be, to have this diversity. And when we build this portfolio of information sources, means that we can then start to spend time to be able to scan through these different sources and to very quickly discern this is something which is worth spending more time on or is not worth spending more time on. And it's basically a faculty that we can refine and hone by doing that consciously as much as we can over time.
Yeah, I love it. In the book, you say the art of seeing has to be learned.
Yes, Marguerite.
We're not very good at it when we're mindless. And some of the things you point out, so like, how do we make this decision about how to filter? And some of what you say is we want to filter in information if it helps us understand the world, if it helps us make better decisions, if it helps us feel fulfilled. Whereas we may want to filter out information that is misleading or reinforces biases or even just makes us unhappy. If it wastes time or attention or if it's irrelevant to our purpose. And so one thing I thought of that I wanted to run by you, if this is an example of filtering, is I've really noticed that when I'm mindlessly scrolling social media, it doesn't make me feel good. Like I physically don't feel good, right? It feels like an information hangover. If that's a thing. And so I sort of curated my Instagram. I've limited how much I'm on it, but I've also curated it so that it shows me accounts like French bulldogs because I love French bulldogs, or books, or Upworthy. It's things that are feel good for me. And so even though it doesn't serve much purpose, maybe other than entertainment, and it might waste a little time, but it also does bring me joy. So I was just curious what your thoughts are in terms of that sort of like purpose and filtering that we've been talking about so far.
Well, it comes back to what I said. Does the information serve you? And if it makes you feel good, then it is good. So, you can, of course, spend your entire day looking at cat videos. And that may be a little imbalanced life. But if, you get some laughs or some joy around seeing that, then that's absolutely a good, balanced part of your information diet. Though I also think one of the most valuable things is inspiration. So you can get sort of, happiness and joy and laughter, and that's fine, or it just sort of feels good and looks good. But I think that part of the very positive information we can find is saying, I'm inspired. That makes me want to act. I can see the potential of humanity. Because we get so much in the media, there's negative aspects of humanity. We're all reported on these atrocities, on these people doing bad things. That's what makes news, of course. People being nice to each other is not very newsworthy. But when we can see people who are doing extraordinary things on a small scale or on a global scale, whatever, this is something which not only makes us feel good, but actually shapes our actions, the way we behave, who we are as a person. And this comes back to purpose. And I think there is this positive cycle in a way where if we start to expose ourselves to information that gives us a clue to our identity, then we actually start to say, that inspires me. So that gives me a better idea of who I am and what I want to be and who I aspire to be. And so that is really useful information. And, it may just be in the general flow of things, but we do need to make sure we do not expose ourselves to too much of the negative, because that is the nature of the news. That is the nature of so much that we see are things which makes us despair for humanity. And I think that, that's a very common response today. Just saying there's so much atrocity. Everyone sees this all the time. And that is part of what the world is. But there is so much which comes less through those filters, which is very positive and inspiring around us, seeing the positive aspects of humanity and who we can be and who we can become. And that needs to be really big part of our information diets.
Yeah. And this also makes me think, and this could be a whole other conversation for a whole entire day, but it makes me think of algorithms, and that the more you consume of those atrocities and negativity, the more that's what's shown to you. And so then you end up in an even more dire situation, and really speaks to how important it really is to do this consciously, to make these choices, use these 5 powers like you suggest.
Yeah, well, doom scrolling has many negative feedback loops. One of them is that it makes you feel bad, and so that's you just sort of continue scrolling. And others that, as you were saying, you're training the algorithms to show you more of that. So there's so many ways in which, as you begin to engage in these negative news, you get negative cycles in your psychology, and you get negative cycles in the algorithms, and you probably get negative cycles in the way the whole world works because we're all getting stuck in those cycles. And so once we can, and I've just created a little Twitter list of positive news. And to be frank, it's very hard to find positive news channels, but that's just sort of one thing. All right, well, I'm going to find what positive news I can find out there, and that can be just one of my ways to start the day.
There's actually an app that's called the Good News Network, and I think
there's a few out there.
Yeah, there's a few out there, and that's something that you can create for yourself. But okay, let's talk a little bit about the power of framing. So one of the things you say in this chapter is that information and knowledge are not the same thing. That information informs you of facts, but it doesn't tell you what you need to do to act effectively. And our task is to develop useful knowledge. And to do this, we must form and recognize patterns. So talk to us a little bit about what you mean by this and what is framing and how does that help us to thrive when in information overload?
So information is just information. And, you can maybe get good at trivia if you've got lots of information, but that doesn't give you knowledge about the world. And so knowledge is building the connection. So our brains are semantic networks where we are connecting the meaning of things and what we see and how they're connected. So these form, what are commonly called our mental models, our models of how the world works. And if we have a good, accurate mental model of the world, it means that we know we're more and more able to say that this action will lead to this result. And so we can see that there are some people that have very effective mental models and that they know what action to take to achieve the outcomes they want. There's other people that have very ineffective mental models where they keep on doing behaviors that don't give them what they want. And so this is our knowledge. And so we need to form the connections. When we see information, we need to say, well, how is this connected? How does this form a whole? How do I see the entire system? And one of the best ways to do this is visually, where we can capture information, sort of see connections, put that out. And I describe in my book a number of different approaches for how we can capture ideas, the connections between them, and the patterns that form out of that. And this is something which we are doing in our minds all the time, whether we are conscious of it or not. But the more explicit we make that, we're able to capture the information that is relevant to us or useful to us and see how that is connected and to form it into a whole of understanding of our domain, of developing our expertise. That's really the task. So this framing is literally building frameworks of all of the information we come across to create the knowledge that enables us to act effectively.
Like sort of seeing the big picture and then also seeing the ways in which the pieces sort of beneath the big picture interconnect and relate.
Absolutely.
Yeah. One of the examples you give is chunking for memory. And it immediately made me remember a demonstration I used to do when I taught Psych 101. And we would use chunking to memorize 21 digits or 16 digits of the natural log of E. And this was in the late 90s, and I still remember that number and could recite it right now to you. But that's just completely useless information that I don't actually need to have in my head. There's no big picture. There's no interconnectedness. But it did make me remember that I had that odd fact stuck in my head. Okay, so let's talk about the power of attention. You talk in the book about 6 different modes of attention. And if people want to learn more about that, they can read that in the book. But essentially, it's, you talk about multitasking doesn't work. It's problematic. The more we allow our attention to skip around, the less effective we'll be. And you actually cite some of the work of Nir Eyal, who wrote the book Indistractable. And he was actually my very first guest on this podcast when I started co-hosting. He's wonderful. And he and I talked in depth about time boxing. And he actually very generously wrote a blurb for my book too. So he holds a special place in my heart. And there's so much rich information and advice in this particular chapter that readers can benefit from. But I'm wondering if you might be willing to share a couple of your personal favorite ways to harness your own attention.
What I say is, it's just one of the I suppose, distill out of the book, a recommendation for people is that at least once a week, everyone should have for at least 90 minutes, do one thing only and turn every notification off that they can find so that they truly are doing one thing. And that's kind of approach is what enabled me to write my book, amongst other things.
Yeah.
So I take a little while to get going in the morning. And then through the morning, I can get pretty focused into the early to mid-afternoon. And after that, my brain kind of fades. So I basically try to have no meetings between 10 and 1, generally. And so because I have various calls with different parts of the planet, so I'm sometimes up early and sometimes up late. But after I've, had anything in the morning, I have a coffee and do some email. So I feel I've got that out of the way. And then I say, okay, I'm going to do one thing. These are 2 or 3 things. I'll just say, okay, I'm just going to get into the zone and I'll just power on to that. And that becomes, it's a capacity I've developed through practice. And part of it is that for me is that particular time of the day. It suits my cycle. And a very important part of this is your own cycle, where some people are great in the morning. I interviewed somebody from my podcast, a venture capitalist, who found that the secret to his success is he gets up at 4 a.m. and is able to work before his phone starts going. And
Wow.
That wouldn't work for me, but there's other people that work really well in the evenings, and that's the time when they sort of power in, they get a lot of stuff done. So it's part of it's understanding your own cycle.
So you have to pay attention to your own strengths and weaknesses when it comes to attention. And that's something I imagine can even change over time. There was a time in my life where I was a night owl, and now I am absolutely more of a morning person. And at this stage of my life, I used to have boundless energy, and now I'm noticing, oh my goodness, 4:00 rolls around PM, late afternoon, and I'm done. And I'm not used to that. Normally I can go. And so being sensitive to those things and being able to shift as needed too, I imagine is
absolutely right. Yeah. But one of the key points from that is that, I've found a time of the day when I can say, all right, I'm going to make that time open so that I can just dive into things and get into the zone and to just have my focus and get going. And we all need to find that. That's absolutely critical. We talked about time boxing as this idea of, you have various periods. Within those periods, you're focusing on one thing only. So of those modes of attention, one of them is scanning. So scanning is, for example, often in the morning, people in the past, they might have read the newspaper, or now you might go through a few websites or so on as your news check. And that should be for a period of time that starts and then stops. Mm-hmm. And the same thing as well, scanning can also be checking your Instagram or other social media, whatever, if that's part of what you want to do and it has value to it. But again, that is a time box, as in you start it and then you end it. So it doesn't go on and on and on forever. So there's the start and stop for the scanning information. That's one of the biggest dysfunctions, the biggest mistakes, as it were, as people do, is that, okay, I'm a world of vast information. How do I keep on top of everything? I'm going to continually scan. Well, no, that's not the best approach. You've got to scan in order to find the things where you actually spend some time on. All right, I've scanned and I found 3 things which I really need to spend some time on and assimilate, to bring into my mental models, to take into my frameworks. And so this breaking up these periods of time. And so there's a period of time where you can say, okay, I'm going to read a book, or I'm going to, read 1 or 2 of these articles that I've put aside. And so these are all things which, I still struggle with and work on and try to improve. And I'm not saying that I'm, a paragon of excellence at all these things, but I mean, I have built out this sort of a structure to do this as well as I can.
Right. It's about being deliberate. And, we do the best we can in a world that is designed to distract us, right? I mean, as you and I are sitting here on Zoom, my instant messenger icon thing has that little notification that says 3 messages have come in since we've been talking. It And that little red circle is designed to rob my attention from you, right? And my phone is sitting on a charger over to my right. And when messages come in, it's lighting up. And so one of the ways we can harness attention is to turn all of that off.
Absolutely.
To make those notifications go away. And of course, we're capable of doing it, right? When I go to my Pilates classes, I'm not interrupting my workout to go check my phone. I'm perfectly capable of doing that one thing mindfully for an hour. And so to take that same approach, even when we're sitting at our computers, when we're writing or reading or doing any of the number of things that we do in our personal and professional lives, is to be more deliberate about how we spend that time on one thing, truly one thing at a time.
Absolutely. And, there's a number of little, I suppose, techniques or approaches or tips or whatever you might call them. And one of them is turn off all notifications on your phone, which are not essential. And so, you'll see them if you check it, but you don't need to have them flashing up on your screen. Second is turn your phone face down at all times when it's not absolutely critical, or even better, not have it in the same room. And there's many people have quoted this study which shows that having your phone in the same room as opposed to in a different room, decreases your IQ by however many points, because you know that it's there, and you know that if you turn it over, you'll see all these messages. And so this is our brain. Let's understand how our brain works, and let's transcend that by saying, okay, I'm going to take that away. And, there may be times when you just scroll through your phone, and that's fine. But as long as that's not through the day, as long as you're giving your brain, the capacity to build its strength. And again, it's this idea that attention is a muscle that we can exercise, and we must exercise, because otherwise it goes flabby. And our attention is wandering all over all of the time. So whatever it may be, whether it's meditating or just awareness techniques, or simply just spending a time when we have at least 30 minutes when everything is turned off except for the one thing we're doing. That shouldn't be too hard, surely, but it is hard. So if let's practice that. And once we practice that, we can sort of get better at it. And it just becomes an incredibly valuable capability in the world in which we live today.
I love that comparison of it's like building a muscle. And if you don't work it out, you get flabby. And it reminded me of a day where I noticed I was sitting at a red light. And how long is the longest red light? 20 seconds, maybe? I mean, a red light is not a very long period of time. And I noticed this strong, almost physical urge. I noticed it was like I was bored and had nothing to do, and I had an urge to check my phone. And I don't check my phone, when I'm in the car and when I'm driving, but it was this moment of, oh my gosh, what have we done to ourselves and to our brains that we are now in an age where you can't sit at a red light without feeling like you need some sort of stimulation of information, and how, again, just like fighting an uphill battle, how problematic that's become.
Yeah, it is becoming more of a problem. It's the nature of where our brains have been trained to be always distracted. Right. So this comes back to, I mentioned this idea of awareness techniques. And one of them simply is that if we are at a red light or if we're at a pedestrian crossing, is to, for example, pay attention to our breathing. Mm-hmm. Or to go into peripheral vision, where we open our perception to what is, to the extremes of our vision rather than right in front of us. Or to just notice something about the people around us, to actually spend the time to look at, see what we see. So to just say, while I'm waiting for this light to turn, there's so much interesting around us. There's so much just interesting around breath, to pay attention to our body, to stretch our muscles a little bit, to just be aware. And these are, in fact, extraordinary opportunities. These little breaks when we're waiting for a coffee or in a queue. These are times when there are alternatives. We don't need to pick up our phone. Right. And in fact, we can find not only joy, but richness of experience. Yeah. And we might even learn things or notice things that can serve us in all sorts of ways.
Absolutely. I think it's so important that we try to retrain our brains to get off that autopilot where we just react to the urge to make it go away, and do that more deliberate choosing of really using our senses to tune in and pay attention to the world around us. Those small moments really, they matter a lot. So, okay, let's talk about the power of synthesis. You say, quote, if you want to run the world, be a synthesizer, end quote. So the power of synthesis, they're all important, but the power of synthesis seemed like something that you were particularly invested in. Would that be fair to say? Like, tell us what you think about synthesis, what this means, and maybe some tips for how we can become better synthesizers.
I think it's the ultimate human capability. I think it defines us as humans, is the ability to just experience the world and to pull that all together to make sense of that. And, so that we can see opportunities, make better decisions, to understand the world in some form. And every invention, every creation, everything which has moved us forward in any way is a synthesis, is a bringing together in novel ways of what, is our experience or what others have created before us. That all progress comes from the synthesis.
From connecting the dots.
Yes, of the connections. Yeah. And so indeed, essentially those jobs which are the most highly paid in the world are all jobs of synthesis, of pulling together disparate perspectives and informations and insights and ideas and perspectives and experience into something which is new and novel and insightful. So in a world of AI, where we are, I often say, we're not in competition with the machine. We need to have the AI to design it and use it to complement our capabilities. But what allows us to transcend the AI is this capacity for synthesis. And so that's something which we need to nurture in ourselves. And part of the ways in which we nurture our ability for synthesis is to be open to experience, to ideas, because the faster the world moves, the more being closed to ideas doesn't work. The world's different than it was yesterday. And so we need to be open to seeing that and understanding that. And that's a key part of this ability to synthesize, is actually to be open to the signals which we can pull together. And another critical part of it is to be open to changing our minds. So again, as the world is evolving, we need to evolve the ways in which we think. And that is synthesis, not a end state. It is a process of perceiving, of seeing, of connecting, of understanding, of making sense of the world. And that is not just joyful, it is incredibly practical. And as a sense, the wealthiest people in the world are all people who excel at this. And this is something which we can nurture and understand. And that's what I've tried to lay out in that chapter, is the techniques and approaches and foundations so that we can improve our capacity for synthesis.
And we do this naturally and automatically. Our brains like to make meaning of things. They like to understand.
That's what the brains do, yes.
It's what brains do, right? I do an exercise with my clients sometimes where, in fact, I'll do it with you. I'll just hold up these two things. Like, what does this paperweight and this pen, what do these two things have in common?
They're sitting on your desk.
Okay, so there's no right answer. I just literally picked up two completely arbitrary objects from my desk. And what I like to point out is but just notice what your brain does. The answer's irrelevant. It's that process of noticing how, if your brain goes, I don't know nothing, it won't stop there. It will chug and chug and chug until it's able to come up with an answer. And that can be a problematic thing when we're trying to solve problems that are unsolvable. And this is particularly relevant for, sometimes people who have anxiety and think about all the potential eventualities, all the catastrophes that could occur. But I think it also speaks to what we're talking about, is that brains are designed to try to solve problems, to try to make sense of things. And we can harness that power in useful ways.
Which actually does come back to our starting point in the improvisation. And that indeed is one of the techniques, which, in this case, you've got two different things. All right, what connects them? That's sort of just something where the brain spontaneously does whatever it does. As you say, no right or wrong answers, but it is connecting. And so that's something which we can practice and we can develop, is, our brains as improvisation, which means that you take what is there. And so the key part of improvisation is you accept whatever you are given. Right. And you do
yes,
something
and.
with it. That's the yes and, exactly. And so that's what we want to assist our brains to be good at. And our educational system beats it out of us.
Yeah, it does.
So that's one of the big problems is we've all been educated. We've all been spent years in these institutions which are designed to essentially
squash
stop us.
Creativity.
Yeah, exactly. And spontaneity and this ability to sort of go off on tangents and to connect in various ways. So, this linearity to our educational system. So,
and not synthesizing. I mean, when I think about my kids, they're literally learning math facts.
Yeah.
Which, of course, you need to know in the world. You need to know how to multiply numbers. But so much of it is, it's not critical thinking. It's not really understanding the big picture. It's facts versus knowledge.
Yes. And so there's the facts and there's the knowledge from the connections from that. And then there's the step beyond that, which is the process of the pulling together and creating new things from what it is we have seen and experienced.
So would you be willing to walk through an example to try to pull this all together for our listeners? I had an idea that I thought would be appropriate for you. And it's funny because you just mentioned AI. And so the thought I had is AI right now it's absolutely everywhere. And, most of the media exposure around it has been kind of scary. And so let's say, and this is actually true, I will say for me, like if I'm feeling a little overloaded by all of the information that's available around AI, but I want to dig into it because I don't want to put my head in the sand and I want to understand. I'm not sure which purpose that would be. Expertise, maybe. I mean, I don't really want to be an expert, but I do want to have some knowledge and understanding. So can you walk us through the 5 powers, like the process that we might go through if we're feeling like I'm overloaded by AI information, and so I want to learn about this in a way that is adaptive?
Okay. It's a great example, very, very contemporary. So first thing, it is worth thinking, all right, why do I want to learn about AI? And simply asking that question.
Yeah.
All right, because it might impact my job, because I want to understand how society might be impacted or politics might be impacted. It's important to the world I live in. It might be important to me. It might be important to my kids and their education or whatever it may be. All right. So you're thinking, all right, just, it doesn't have to be, you don't have to write a book or an essay. It's like, just think about why am I interested in AI? What is the things about AI that I'm most interested in? And there is also a scale where you can think of, for any particular topic, do you want to be expert? Do you want to be knowledgeable, or do you want to be informed?
I like that.
And so...
because that tells you where you can stop so that you don't go down a never-ending rabbit hole.
Yeah. And so for most people, no, they're not going to aspire to or be able to become an expert in AI. That's a particular, taking a direction in your life. But to be informed, for example, all right, I want to understand the basic issues around AI and how it affects the world. And so there's one of the other key points I make is the distinction between foundational knowledge and ongoing knowledge. So the foundational knowledge is, what are the key elements of this? So in order to understand what is coming out every day in the world of AI, we need to just have some basic understanding. So what are some good sources? So the first thing is to say, all right, what's a good starting point where I can just build whatever level of being informed, which you can say, okay, I understand the elements of that. And so part of that is then to build a framework. And of the mapping techniques, mind maps are a good starting point. And there's lots of other techniques as well, but I think, hopefully I don't need to explain the mind map. Most people have been exposed to that. And so you just get a piece of paper or software, there's plenty of software that does that. AI is in the center. Whenever you come across an idea associated with that, you put it in there and you find a place for it. And as you're finding new concepts related to that, you're just putting them together. And by the nature of just saying, I think it fits there, you are building your own knowledge. You are building your own framework for understanding what AI is and how it's, what the aspects of that which are relevant to you. Which might be, okay, these are some of the risks, or these are some of the opportunities, or these are some of the underlying technologies, or these are some of the major companies, whatever it may be. So in terms of the ongoing, the portfolio of information, there are many types of information sources. And in fact, one of the ones which is most useful for AI is newsletters, where people do the filtering for you. And so rather than getting a stream of, right, I'm going to search for all the articles which have AI in their title, would not be very useful, because you don't know whether they're important or not, and you get far too much, and you're not going to subscribe to an AI research journal. But there are some very good newsletters which give weekly or whatever it is to say, okay, these are the most important things which have come out, and this is why they're important. So you do need to, find what those are, and it takes a little bit of searching. So that's one part of an information portfolio which is useful to you. And if it's something which you feel, okay, there's this, I've identified some good reasons why I'm interested in AI, then you might say, all right, so during my scanning every day, I'll spend 5 minutes scanning for that, and I'll spend 10 minutes reading one article which I think was interesting. Every day. Or it might be, say, okay, I'll spend half an hour a week, or whatever it is. So you're time boxing, and then you're allocating that. And then, and part of a synthesis exercise around this might be to say, all right, I want to map out the intersection of AI and my area. So AI and psychology. Okay, well, this is an area of synthesis where, all right, what are the connections between psychology and AI? Well, amongst other things, AI starts to reflect some of the models of human thinking. We can learn a little bit more about how the human brain works by seeing some of the models of how AI works. We are seeing AI therapists start to emerge that's creating stress with people, whatever it may be, and then again, starting to draw a little diagram of that. So that's, just a few, I suppose, I think it's a nice example, able to sort of bring together some of those different themes in a way which this becomes part of our information habits and practices in a way that serves us.
That's so great. That is so helpful, because when I think about my own experience, we have an Alexa show, and on the screen, there's often like create stories with your kids, and that's AI. And then there's a lot of talk in the Authors Guild around AI and books and writing. And then, of course, there's psychology and therapy, and it feels so overwhelming, and I get anxious. And so then I just shut down. And some people probably do the opposite, where they overindulge in getting all the information to try to feel less anxious. And so this framework, these 5 powers, really give you a way to take control of how you're going about mining and attending to that information. And I think talking about it and walking through that example, I could feel myself sort of relaxing, like, oh, okay, all right, I've got my tools now that I can go and I can investigate this. It doesn't have to be scary. And it's a way that I can really take charge of the way that I'm interacting with that information. So thank you for doing that. I think that was a really helpful way to kind of wrap up all the things that we've been talking about. And actually, I want to end with a quote. It's a little bit of a long quote, but I just loved this. And I think it kind of brings us full circle, because you were talking about abundance in the very beginning of the interview. So here's a quote from the book, quote, "Perhaps the most fundamental step to thriving is to reframe our perception of our experience from one of overload to that of abundance. With abundance, we have no obligations, only choices. Shifting your mindset can allow you to experience this plenitude as joyful and liberating, treating the information landscapes we live in as places to play, to taste and savor, to appreciate as a gift completely unparalleled in human history," end quote. So I loved that. And kind of related to the example that, to me, it feels like it fits with the example that we just did. So maybe you can leave us with a few words of wisdom for reframing our perception from one of overload to abundance, because I do think we often look at all of this information as overload. And it wasn't until I read your book that I thought, oh yeah, that's quite a mindset shift there that I really like. So any final parting words around abundance?
I used to, old enough to have to go onto libraries and flip through index cards to go
Yeah.
to find a book on a shelf where it was put in the wrong place.
Oh
to
yeah.
find what I was trying to find. And I'm glad that I can find that information far more easily now. And we are information animals. That is the nature of what it is to be human. You know, we seek information, we soak in information, we create information. Well, that's the way we communicate. We are information animals. And I think we need to acknowledge that. And there are some pitfalls in that. But if we can learn to transcend them. So I think this is a time when we have a choice. I think the potential for our cognition to devolve, you know, where we start to think, as some people have suggested, you know, we start to think in more shallow ways, and because we're just getting caught in the flow of information. But we can readily choose. Simply say, all right, well, I am going to choose to use this as a buzz. I'm going to take this as a source of being able to achieve what I want in my life. I'm going to refine my attention so that it's suited to this world. Humans are extraordinarily adaptable, amazingly adaptable. And we've created an environment where we need to be cautious that we're not taking the path of least resistance, ones we are choosing to become who we can be. And I think this is literally a time of human evolution, and one which we need to choose to take.
I love that. Well said. Well, thank you, Ross, so much. This was such an interesting conversation. I loved the book. Again, it's called Thriving on Overload. Ross Dawson, if people want to find out more about you, do you have a website? Where can they go?
So a lot of my work is as a professional speaker, and that's at rossdawson.com. But more generally, the best place to go for the work which I'm doing is amplifyingcognition.com. So in fact, after writing the book Thriving on Overload, I've focusing on the theme of humans plus AI, how humans and AI can work well together.
So it really was an appropriate example to use. Yeah.
So this idea of amplifying cognition is saying this idea of, well, as in we improve our ways of thinking individually, but also we can amplify ourselves with AI. And so this coming together with this idea of amplifying cognition. So that's now my current theme. And there's, links to learning communities and software and other resources that we have around that.
Very cool. So we can put it on our mind maps.
There's not much there at the moment, but but we are trying to do visual. So this idea of how do we visually assist our ability to think and develop knowledge. And so, there's a lot of resources there. And this, I think, so building on Thriving on Overload, I think, the next phase is this idea of how do we amplify our cognition ability to think, and trying to share as much useful resources as I can.
Very cool. Well, we will link to all of that in our show notes. So thanks again so much for being here.
Great pleasure. Thanks.
Thank you for listening to Psychologists Off the Clock. If you enjoy our podcast, you can help us out by leaving a review or contributing on Patreon.
You can get more psychology tips by subscribing to our newsletter and connecting with us on social media.
We'd like to thank our podcast production manager, Jadine Stout-Williams.
This podcast is for informational and entertainment purposes only and is not meant to be a substitute for mental health treatment. If you're looking for mental health treatment, please visit the resources page of our website, offtheclockpsych.com.
So Jill, you say in the interview that you still remember a huge chunk of the numbers of the Euler constant of log E. So why don't you surprise us?
Oh my gosh, you're testing me. Okay, are you ready for this?
Yes.
2.7, 1828, 1828, 45, 90, 45. And then we learned a couple more, but that's where my memory ends, is there. So how many did I get? Let's see, 2.7, 1828, 1828, 45, 90, 45. 16. Whoa, it might be 237, might be the end. I don't know. Somebody can check it, but I'm pretty sure up to there I have it right.
We're going to let our listeners check for the Euler constant. And then Google is going to be like, why are 2 million people looking for the Euler constant on the same day? This is so weird.
And now you're going to start getting menopause content and stuff about the Euler concert.
Excellent. This is how I want my life to look like. All right.